Welcome, everyone. So glad you're here. Nice to see your faces. Thanks for coming to Keep Austin Agile 2025. This is the Lil Tech room. If you're in the wrong room, I'm letting you know now. No, I'm just kidding. And it's our fourth session today, and it is AI-driven product owners, the evolution of collaboration and decision, making in agile teams by Candase Hokanson. We'll have 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to Candase. Enjoy.
Hello. Good afternoon. Okay. Everybody can hear me, right? Awesome. Okay. So my name is Candase Hokanson. I am a business architect at ArgonDigital. We provide professional services to a lot of our clients to help streamline their really complex operations. And over the last few years, as I'm sure everybody has run into, AI and automation have been a lot more and more of our work. And so, obviously, like everybody else, we jumped on the bandwagon. It was like, what is this AI thing? How can it help us? And specifically in my role as a product owner. So I know it's got a really long name, but it's really just AI for product owners, or AI for agile teams, is what we're going to talk about today. I do have one caveat here. I am a product owner. I am not an AI expert. I am not going to be building your AI systems, but we're going to talk through some of the terms. We're going to talk through some fun use cases, and I'm hoping to have time to do a cool demo of some stuff that we're doing internally with our teams with AI as well. Oh, nope. Like Reese, I may have to point it over this way. Let us see. But first, to start with the poll, so I just told you that I'm not the Agile or AI expert. I want to see where you guys are. So just by show of hands, who is using AI regularly for work and is finding business value in it? Okay, a lot of you, great. Who's more relatively new to AI, maybe knows what it is, but isn't using it actively, or maybe only using it for personal stuff? Okay, about the AI. And where are my AI experts out there? Really getting hands-on in those AI projects, really understanding the technical back-end side of AI. Okay, we got one kind of good. So don't ask me any hard questions, please. So this is really more of a beginner, intermediate talk. It feels like most of you guys were in that area, which is great. We're going to really start at the beginning. So if I'm telling you terms you know, you can zone out for a few minutes, take a bio break or something. We'll get to the fun part, I promise, which is really where can we use this? What are the applications of AI? Because they're really almost limitless. It's really exciting to see just how fast things are moving. And Jay this morning really set me up well with his keynote, because we'll dive into some of his things. So looking at our agenda, like I said, we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to give a quick introduction to AI, talk through some of those terms. What do those terms mean? Why should we use AI? What's the benefit of that? There's actually been a lot of studies in this area. Then we're going to get to the fun part. How can we use AI on our projects? So we're going to talk a little bit about how do you make AI be your SME, be those experts that Jay talked about in the keynote, as well as what I'm calling the advanced use cases. These are ones that maybe you're not going to get just by talking to ChatGPT, one where you may have to start supplying your own information to get information out. And then lastly, since it's a big topic with AI, we're going to talk a little bit about how do we use AI securely? Where does it fall in the data security buckets? So let's get all the technical definitions out of the way. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide because you'll hear all these acronyms thrown around, and I'll be honest, when I started, I didn't know what these things meant. I was like, LLM, okay, great. What's that? So first, Gen AI. So when people talk about AI, and if you were at the keynote this morning, you saw a very nice visual of this. They're really usually talking about Gen AI or generative AI, AI that creates content. Typically, we think of this as text, but it could be audio, music, audio is music, video, any of pictures, all of that. So within Gen AI is really a subset of AI. So you saw the pretty picture from Jay's. You have machine learning, deep learning, all the way to Gen AI. This is what we're usually talking about these days. Another term you'll see often is LLM. That stands for large language model. It's kind of an outdated term at this point because Gen AI has gone past just text-based models. But it's really cool to think about how it works. It's really just the engine or the model behind how Gen AI generates that content. So Jay gave a quick introduction to this morning, but we have an analogy we like to use of how this works, kind of on the back end. And for us, the best way to think about it is by going back to the text. So Gen AI takes your input, your prompt, right? You gave it a question. And it takes your prompt and all of its information it's been trained on, and it statistically tries to come up with the next best word chunk of what would answer your question. So think of it as like a really complicated autocorrect is how we like to think of it. So it does that first chunk. Then it goes back to your input, takes the new word chunk, and comes up with the next chunk, and so on and so forth until it has what it thinks is statistically the best answer to your question. So it can do this with words, but nowadays, of course, many of them are what the second one there, multimodal, which means it can just do more than text. It can do multiple modes of information. So instead of generating what the next text or word chunk is, it could generate the next pixels for an image, the next audio blip for an audio clip, or the next piece of video for a video screen. Another one you may hear is SLM, or small language model. That really just means it's trained on less stuff. Doesn't have as many parameters it was trained on. So this could mean, yes, it just has lower quality, right, because it's still generic like an LLM, but less trained. Or it doesn't necessarily mean it is worse quality. It could mean that it's a niche thing. So they really trained it deeply on one small thing, and it knows a lot about that. But if you ask it about anything else, it'll be really bad. So those are SLMs. Another one you'll hear is GPT. I've heard this one a lot. Everybody has. Generative pre-trained transformers. This one gets confusing because it really is just a type of LLM. And it's the most common type of LLM used right now. But where people get confused is because OpenAI calls their versions of their LLM GPT-4o, GPT-4, GPT 3.5. If you hear a number, it's usually referring to an OpenAI version. If you just hear GPT with no number, it's generally just talking about a type of LLM. This one's going to be very important later on, RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. So this is where you can actually start feeding your own data into the AI, into those LLMs, and get more contextual information out about your questions. So instead of just being trained on all the data that it's been trained on, you can say, hey, I want it to be specific to my project or my industry or my company even. And so you can do that through RAG. And the last definition for today is context window. So this is kind of like the RAM or memory of the AI. So every LLM has a context window, and that's basically how much information it can process before it starts getting fuzzy. So if you give an AI too many questions, you go back and forth too many times, it'll run out of its context window. And when it does that, that's when it's most likely to start hallucinating or just making up answers. So while nobody really knows for sure, there's nothing that says your context window is 8,000 bits, which I totally made that up. I have no idea if that's a thing. But there's no number like that. Well, it probably exists, but we don't know it. They don't tell us. So you don't know exactly when you run out of that context window. But as soon as you start seeing things that are off, you probably have gone past your context window. So now that we've got all the definitions out of the way, we'll really start with, well, why do we care? Who needs AI? And you guys all came to an AI talk, so I'm probably preaching to the choir. But sometimes we have to sell our company, sell our bosses on the value or the ROI of using AI in our work, especially when we talk about security and data later on, especially when we start talking about proprietary information. Because they're like, well, we don't want our data in there, so you can't use it. But it really can yield a lot of value. So for that, we're going to talk about 3 studies, which are kind of interesting. So this first study was done with the Boston Consulting Group, Harvard, MIT, a bunch of other big names. And what they did is they took 750 Boston Consulting Group consultants, and they grouped them into 3 groups. So one group wasn't able to use AI. They just did their tasks on their own. One group used generative AI, but they had no training. You were given it, have fun. The third group had generative AI to help them with their tasks, and they were given training on how to prompt and get good answers out of the AI. Once they had those groups, they then gave them 18 high-level knowledge worker tasks to do. So all the consultants had the same tasks, and they specifically chose these tasks because they had benchmarks for what were considered good outcomes for each of these 18 tasks. So these consultants, they did their tasks, they measured them at the end of this, and what they found is that the 2 groups that had Gen AI at their disposal had 40% higher quality on the tasks that they did. So whatever was good, theirs was 40% better. It took 25% less time to do the 18 tasks, and they were able to do 12% more tasks. So these are this is the benchmark numbers of what AI can really help us do, especially when we're looking at knowledge worker tasks. Now, AI is not good at everything. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So we don't want to make the mistake that we think it is, but knowledge worker tasks, like a lot of product ownership, right, coming up with user stories, the backlog, visual models, All of those things that take a lot of brain power, AI can help us be better and faster at that. The other thing we like to use this study for is if you start using Gen AI and you're like, man, this isn't making me any faster, you might actually have a people or process problem. It may not be an AI problem. We like to think that working with generative AI is really a skill. It's not something you're just born with and you talk to ChatGPT and magical things happen. You really have to learn how to interact with the AI to get the best information out. And so if you're not seeing these gains, well, maybe you just haven't quite learned how to get the best information out. Or maybe you've fed it bad data, and thus it's giving you bad information out. We'll talk about that later, too. But this is the benchmark. This is how much gains you can have, and I think that's really exciting. But as I said, AI is not great at everything. And so you really want to look at your processes, look at your tasks, to really understand where can AI help me? Because so many people we talk to fall into this trap that's like, hey, I see all these gains in AI. It's great. I'm going to try to plug it in as many places as I can. Let's just start using AI for everything. And it's just not really great at everything. So this study was from McKinsey. I think it's a relatively new one, but I don't know the exact year. I can go find it later. But what they did is they looked at thousands of processes across thousands of business areas to say, well, where is the greatest gains in efficiency from AI? And what was really interesting is that of those thousands of processes, they found out that most of the gains from AI really only show up in about 64 areas. I don't think all of them are on here, but these are the biggest ones, and they're on this graph here. Even more than that, of the 64 areas that had the biggest gains in AI, 75% of those gains were in the ones in blue up here. And this is huge. We're not talking small gains here. We're talking the estimated gains in productivity are 2 to 4 trillion, trillion with a T, dollars in the next couple years. So huge amounts of efficiency that can be gained by using AI. And as you can see at the top there, software engineering, what a lot of us do, especially in that product owner space. So lots of areas for that improvement. Lastly, my chart is not as cool as some of Jay's, but to show you just how fast some of the things are moving and how quickly AI is learning, this is just one study. This is actually a pretty old study, actually, but it's really interesting from an illustrative point of view. They took a medical licensing exam that we give to humans, right? How do you get your medical license? On that exam, most humans need about a 60 to pass, so those are human passing. They took that same test and ran it through several LLMs. They ran it through just kind of automation with no LLM, and you can see it did pretty badly. But then it went through 2 OpenAIs, so GPT 3.5, which was the previous version, and then GPT 4, which at the time was their paid version. And even just between GPT 3.5 and GPT 4, which was about 6 months' time, the LLM got significantly better. So it went from about a 60-ish on the test to in the mid-80s. And to give that comparison, most human experts on this medical licensing exam are in the 90s. It also compared a very specific medical LLM. And of course, so it did a little better. But it also had gains in that 6-month time. And this is consistent across many different disciplines, where your LLMs are learning so quickly that they're quickly becoming as smart as many of your human experts. Okay, great, you're bought in. You want to use AI, you see the value of it. But the next question we often get is, how do I trust it? How do I know that it's giving me good information? And, or both, how do I know which LLM to use, right? I've used ChatGPT, fine, but maybe there are better ones out there. So we're going to talk through some of those. For that, we have 2 rules of thumb I'm going to go over today. The first here is our Teddy Roosevelt rule. So we came across this quote a couple years ago, and we really liked it. So this, from Teddy Roosevelt, if I can be right 75% of the time, I shall come up to the fullest measure of my hopes. This was mind-boggling for me, because I like to personally think that I'm right like 90% of the time, but okay. So for a president, someone who hopefully is pretty smart, to really expect to be wrong so often is really humbling for me. But we also thought it was a good rule for AI, that this is our Teddy Roosevelt rule for AI, is just assume that it's only 75% correct. It's going to be wrong. It's not going to be right all the time. You have to have that discerning hat on to say, well, are you giving me the right information? But getting you 75% of the way there is still a huge boon in productivity, because you don't have to do 100%, you only have to do the 25%. So we want to start with the base assumption that it's only 75% accurate. And what does this mean? Well, it doesn't mean that I can say, yep, first 75 words are great, next 25 words are bad. No, it means we have to look at the risk-reward every time we get information out of, well, how much do I want to trust this? Or do I care? Sometimes if you're thinking like a brainstorming activity, maybe we don't care if it's completely wrong because we just wanted to get a lot of ideas, and we'll figure that all out later. But if it's something that's time critical, or we're going to talk a little bit about using this to help us write our user stories, well, there's actually risk if your user story is wrong, right? We could build the wrong thing, then we're wasting money. So we have to think about that risk reward. How wrong could it be? And if it's wrong, what's the impact of that? And if the impact is big, well, maybe you make sure that you're the expert in whatever you're having it do so that you know immediately when it's wrong. So it's kind of a give and take of exactly what you trust and don't. So my kind of rule of thumb here is when I'm using it, if it's something I know, well, I'll just take the 75%. I can edit the rest. But if it's something I don't know and I'm asking it to be my subject matter expert, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I know that I'm going to have to spend more time validating the results because I can't just trust that it was right. Because I can't tell it was wrong. I'm probably going to have to go look it up. I'm going to have to go talk to somebody. I'm going to have to go, I don't know, find some other source. So make sure we plan to have a little more time when we're reviewing that. Okay, well, we're going to make an assumption that's only 75% correct. But how do I know which AI to use, which LLM to use? This leads us to our second rule of thumb, which we call the Van Halen rule. So to explain this rule, so this is a quick way to kind of weed out bad AI tools, bad platforms that won't do what you need them to do. So Van Halen was a band, and as they were getting big, people thought they were beginning to think they were divas because they would play all these big stadiums and they would make all these outrageous demands, or what people thought were outrageous demands. But it turns out they were actually being kind of ingenious. So, well, they weren't being divas on purpose anyway. So Van Halen wanted to put on the best shows that they possibly could, which meant they were pretty much only playing these huge venues. And they had all of these technical requirements that needed to be met to the T to put on a good show. They knew what these technical requirements were, and they listed them out in all of their contracts. In excruciating detail, these were in the contracts. Great. So they're documented. Well, good times. In every contract, though, was a clause that said if the venue didn't meet any one of these requirements, then Van Halen would not play the show, and they would still get paid. In amongst all these technical requirements was what we call the M&M clause. It was a clause that said in every show that they played in their dressing room, there needed to be a bowl of M&Ms, and all the brown ones had to be picked out. And so, but it turns out it was really genius because they didn't have time. They're going city to city. They don't have time to say, okay, here's my list of technical requirements. Did you meet every one of these? But they could quickly go to their dressing room and say, is there a bowl of M&Ms? Are there any brown ones? If that bowl of M&Ms was not there, or the brown ones were there, then they immediately knew one of two things. One, either the venue didn't actually read the contract closely enough, or two, they were cherry picking what to do. Either way, that meant that they probably didn't do all the technical requirements they were supposed to do, and they would not play the show. How does this relate to AI? Well, we want to help Van Halen pick our AI filter. There is a lot of AI tools out there, and more every day. And unfortunately, a lot of it's vaporware. So we need filters to say, how do I quickly parse through all the noise that's out there and find which AI or LLM works for me? So you're going to have to pick your own filters, but I'm going to tell you the two that we like to use at ArgonDigital. And these are up here. So the first one, can I install it on a local server? These relate primarily to security and privacy because those are big topics in AI. How do I know that my data is secure and that you're going to keep my data private? So if I can install it on a local server, that means that is pretty much the highest security thing you can be because you don't have to have access to the internet. It stays within my ecosystem. I can know 100% that my data is secure. So if I can install it on a local computer or a local server, that's good. Almost all of your open source LLMs have an option for this. So that's security. When we think about privacy, how do I know that my data, the PII, is secure? Well, we use HIPAA. HIPAA, of course, is the Medical Privacy Act. Most companies will not say they are HIPAA compliant if they are not, because it comes with such huge fines. So if they are HIPAA compliant, that's usually much more stringent and strict than most companies' privacy policies. So those are the first two. They're not our only things. We'll look for other things later, but using these two filters can weed out a bunch of the bad actors or bad apples, so to speak. And you can come up with your own. if there's something specific about your data, your security, figure out what that filter is so you can look at the realm of LLMs and quickly filter out any ones that aren't going to meet your needs. And we'll talk a little bit about picking those LLMs later, but the rules of thumb are so fun, we wanted to start with them. So that was the intro. We'll have questions at the end, so keep them in mind, but I want to get into the fun stuff. Uh-oh. Or not. Okay, oh, that's not a fire alarm, good. Nope, we're all getting an Amber Alert. No worries. If it was a fire alarm, we could just do it in the parking lot, it'd be okay. So now we're going to get into, okay, we want to use AI, we've learned some rules of thumb, we know it's not always right, we know we have to put on our discerning hats. How can we actually use this on our jobs? So I've got a couple of use cases. We're going to start with the first one, which is called leveraging SMEs. And Jay talked about this, right? AI can be our experts. They know a lot more than we do. So we can, if we know how to ask them the right questions, we can get a whole lot of data out. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to spend a good amount of time on some prompt engineering. But first, a story. So this is not my story, but I have to tell it because it was really the first time that we at ArgonDigital had used AI as our SME. So this is one of my colleagues. He was working on a network security automation project at a big IT firm. This company was huge, but at the end of the day, they really only had one person, one SME, who knew the ins and outs of this process. It was to upgrade firmware for one of their network security boxes. So they're trying to get time with this SME. They finally get him on a call. It's a 30-minute call. And the guy's voice starts to get shaky as they're asking him questions. And they're like, well, what's up with that? Okay, maybe it's nerves, whatever. But what they realize is about 20 minutes into that 30-minute meeting, this SME had not answered a single one of their questions directly. They were getting no information out of him. So they go, wait, fine. They come back for meeting number 2. Meeting number 2 comes up. The guy's 20 minutes late, so now they only have 10 minutes. And by the end of the second meeting, they still have zero information from this SME. We're consultants, of course, so we're frustrated. But even the people at that company were frustrated. So they're like, dude, we want to automate this process. Like, we need this information. So my poor colleague was like, okay, well, how am I going to get this information? Because I need to elicit this so I can write the requirements and get to building, to this automation. So he had been reduced to just digging through these technical manuals, which was just brain melting for him. And he was like, there's got to be something better. To which he's like, oh, ChatGPT, right? I've used it before for personal stuff. I've used it for brainstorming. He's like, I never really used it for a SME before, but it's got to be better than what I'm getting now, which is nothing. So he had been pretty good at prompting. So he's actually one of the people at ArgonDigital that helps us prompt, by the way. So I've learned a lot from him. So he went through, talked with ChatGPT, and within a couple hours had more information than he had gotten in 2+ weeks with this actual SME. Now, he was not the expert, right? So he didn't know if it was lying to him, but the time that it took to validate the information after he had it was much faster than it would have been trying to chase this SME down or try to pull the data out of these technical documents. So we can use this as our SME, and it's really valuable for that. Before I get into the how-to, that actual prompt engineering piece of it, I've got 2 takeaways here. One, you can use this for anybody. It doesn't have to be just those really difficult SMEs or stakeholders that you can't get a hold of. A lot of our LLMs are trained on data that we want to know about. So they have a lot of information that we can get out. I actually used this myself just recently on one of my projects. I was working for a Hawaiian HR company. They were looking into compliance for their Hawaiian Prepaid Medical Care Act. On the surface, by the way, I am not an expert in Hawaii medical care law or anything like that, but I needed to know it because we needed to know the rules if we were going to automate compliance for this. So I was like, I'll follow his lead. I'll have my SME. Because on the face of it, the law is very simple. So in Hawaii, if you work 20 or more hours for 4 consecutive weeks, by law, your employer has to give you health care. There are some rules you can waive, but you can't just opt out. You have to waive for very specific reasons, like you're covered by another plan. Sounds very straightforward, right? Sometimes it is. If you're a weekly employee and you're submitting timesheets every week, yes. But I was using this virtual SME to really go through and what are the edge cases? So what happens if you're only getting time biweekly or semi-monthly? How do I know when you've worked 20 hours for 4 consecutive weeks? What happens if you become eligible but then get terminated? So all of these kind of various edge cases I could ask the AI about and then validate them with the actual experts over in Hawaii who could tell me, yeah, that's right, or maybe the AI got it kind of right, but it's really this. And it gave me a jump start on my process flows to then take into those meetings. And the second one, which I think doesn't come up enough, is just that there's still fear. There's still a lot of fear in the world around AI and automation. And once we know that, we can help to mitigate it or overcome it. So a lot of times when you start coming in and like, we're going to automate this process or we're going to use AI, people might be afraid that you're going to eliminate them out of or get them out of a job. They're going to have to go find work somewhere else. For my colleague, that's really what he found. He's like, oh, this guy probably thinks we're going to automate his job and then he's going to lose his job. And that's why he doesn't want to give me the information. And I'm not going to lie, sometimes that happens, but most of the time we're trying to make people's lives better with automation and AI. We're trying to take away the drudgery, the grunt work, to allow people to focus on those higher level things and higher level tasks that only people can do. So the more that we can get that point across with our stakeholders, with our SMEs, with the people we're talking about, the less resistant, let's go with that, they're going to be towards adoption. Okay. Now this one's gonna be rough because this is only one slide, but this is basically all the meat and potatoes. So this is actually how you get to that good prompt. So what we found, and of course we love acronyms, we love easy ways to remember things, so we came up with the SMEs acronym. And so this is how do you get that information out of the AI in a way that you can then use it, and how do you kind of interact with that AI? Because I've been guilty of this myself. Too many people write very short, small prompts, right? Just ask it a question and expect all the right answers. And you'll get an answer, sure. But if you really want good information out, you have to give it the background. You have to give it enough information and really hone it in, as I think Jay mentioned, of like know where to look within that neural network. And that's what these prompts do. So a lot of times when you're done with this, and I'll tell you, it took me a while to get the patience for this, because I was like, well, if I have to write this like 2-paragraph prompt, like why don't I just do it myself? But once you get the hang of it and it becomes like that learned muscle memory, then you can do this a lot quicker and you can get better information out faster. So SMEs, set up, modify format, expand, and sus. Just for fun, our acronym has an acronym within it. So that first part, that setup, this is really the bulk of the prompt. This is kind of the starting point of what you're gonna feed into the AI. So to do that, we have another acronym, which is PREACH. So we want to teach you how to preach to the AI so that it can give you the right information. First, tell it what the problem is in detail. Write down what the problem is you're trying to solve and how the AI can help you. Not just asking it a question, but really going to why are you asking that question. You want to give it a role, especially if you're doing a SME. You want to tell it what role it's playing in this to have it give you the information. I think Jay used the analogy of like, pretend you are an expert in this, and it'll go access more information than it would have if you just said, hey, what's the answer to this question? And here, again, you're going to hear this a lot. You want to be as specific as possible. So you don't just want to say, you're a product manager. You might say, you're a product manager for, Hawaii healthcare laws for HR companies. Or in the case of my colleague, it wasn't just network security engineer. It was network security engineer who's an expert in FortiGate, Fortinet servers for model XYZ. And it really helps hone in on what information you're going to get back. Their exactness. Again, as much detail as you can give it of what information to give back. So what kind of information are you looking at? We're going to look at the format a bit in a minute. So give it any formats, any additional context about the problem. As much information as you can do there. And then the rest of these are very similar. So associates, what are any stakeholders or other roles in the company that the AI may need to take into account, right? The network security engineer works with, I don't know, another type of security engineer. If there are any constraints, so timelines, right? This is especially important if you're trying to do things like, hey, help me build a roadmap for this product. Well, you want to give it those constraints. Do I have timeline issues or budget constraints? Because if you just tell me to give me a timeline, it's going to come back and be like, okay, here's your 2-year roadmap when I have 3 months. So you want to make sure it has that. And lastly, you would think this wouldn't be helpful, but it turns out it really is. You want to give it the history. You want to tell it what you've already done. How did you get to this point? Because I think it helps it rule out things that it might have otherwise taken into account. So if it knows you've already read the technical requirements document for the Fortinet, FortiGate server, well, it knows it doesn't need to go look at that again. And I'm probably mangling that because that's not my project. But you want to give it all that information. So that's the bulk of your prompt. And that can be really hard. It's going to take some tweaking. You're not going to get it right on your first try. I definitely did not. But once you have that prompt started, you can feed it into the AI, and then comes the M, modify format. So most typically, of course, it's going to reply in text, just kind of narrative text from a ChatGPT. If you want it in something else, tell it. If you want it in JSON, or if you want it in XML, a different programming language, or in some of my cases, it's like, I want you to write this specifically in Gherkin acceptance language or acceptance criteria language. Do the give and when then. It'll do that, but it won't do that unless you tell it. So you have to give it that information too. The next one is really that back and forth. So you've sent the prompt in, it's giving something out. Now you want it to expand. You want to have that interactivity with the AI. So a couple of things here is based on how the LLM works. You might tell it to think in different ways. So it turns out you can actually tell the AI how to do its own processing, which I think is kind of cool. The two that are kind of most common are what we call outlines and chains of thought. So depending on your scenario, having it think about things differently from its normal way can get you better outputs. So the outlines, this tells the AI that, hey, before you actually start giving me all the detailed information, give me an outline of your plan or an outline of the answer you're going to give me. And the reason why this can be useful is because if you remember how I talked about how LLMs work, it takes in that answer it gave before determining the next answer. So if you told it to give it an outline, it'll take your input, it'll take its outline, which is its whole plan, and it'll use all of that to say, okay, well, what's the next best thing to spit out? Versus if you don't, it'll just do kind of stream of consciousness answer until it runs to the end. If you have the chain of thought is a little interesting as well, because this is really for those complex things that need to be done step by step, and you really can't break it down. You can have it tell the AI to do it a chain of thought. Because what this does is it'll tell the AI to do it step by step as well. So it'll only go through the step 1, it'll give you the answer for that, and then it'll go through step 2, step 3, etc. Right? So it's not trying to come up with the whole plan at once, it will take it step by step. So you can help kind of steer the AI to give you the answers that you want. Now, even people who are good at prompting are pretty good at those first 3. What most people forget about is, again, following our rule of thumb, AI is only 75% correct, and the world's a messy place. So we got to suss it out. We got to see, and we can have the AI help us. We don't have to be the only ones that say, yep, you gave us an answer, and I independently will determine which of the 75% is correct or not. Have the AI, hey AI, you gave me this answer. What problems do you see with it? What are the risks in this plan you gave me? What are the gaps in what you gave me? So we have a couple here. Red teaming. So this is business term that some businesses use to really find those problem areas, those risks, as it says there, or weaknesses. So you can ask the AI to do that red teaming for you. We also like 2 other ones, even though it's on expand, it could really be under either. Role reversal. So yep, AI, you've been this FortiGate, Fortinet network security expert. Well, now pretend you're the product manager. What questions should we ask this network security expert? Or you're the project manager. What issues do you see? So you can ask it to play more than one role on the project. And then the other one similar is contrarian takes. Well, what could go wrong? Why shouldn't we do this? What are problems with this? So you can ask it to do those takes and then take the output of all of that into consideration for your answers. So that was a lot. As I said, this is all the prompt engineering pieces. But this is really how you get to those virtual SMEs. And what's great, this is the next slide, is you don't need any special tooling to do this, right? This is just about getting that right prompt and asking the right questions to point the AI, any AI, to the right place in that neural network to get you the information out. So I'm sure most of you have seen these. These are just some of the quick and easy ways to do this. Anybody can go to ChatGPT or the Bing Copilot. Gemini or Claude are also some good options. If you are looking into more advanced ways, there are other options out there. There are some pros and cons. So I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but these are kind of more the technical areas. So if you do want to have more control over the AI versus just say ChatGPT, these are 2 options for you. So one is we're going to call them custom GPTs. OpenAI just calls them GPTs, but then that makes it even more confusing. So we're going to call them custom GPTs to separate them. These are basically designated AI bots. So instead of just having a ChatGPT history that has everything you've talked about, and if you get off topic or you talk about something else, you can fuse it. With these custom GPTs, you can build bots or have bots for specific things. So you can say, this is my network security SME, and this is my product management SME, and this is my project management SME. And it'll actually keep that SME prompt or SME's prompt that you built in its history, and it'll always reference it. It won't lose it like it would if you were using just, say, ChatGPT. The one call out here, there's a lot of good stuff in there from a technical perspective that I'm not going to get into, but you can do things like change the parameters, the temperature, I forget all the other names. You can do function calling and API calls, but the big call out here is this is less secure than some of your other options. This is apparently a relatively recent change, but OpenAI has recently made it so that if you're using these custom GPTs, you cannot opt out of training. Anything you put in there, they can train their AI LLMs on. So it's not as secure for that proprietary information. The other option, also by OpenAI, is their playground. This is really more of kind of technical developer-centric. Instead of trying to build something from the ground up, it gives you that interface to, as it says, playground, to play around. It is more secure. It will never train on your data because it's part of their API stack. But it allows you, again, similar to the custom GPTs, you can adjust the various parameters. You can even go one step further on here. And again, I am not the AI expert, so I'm not going to go into like how you do it. But you can actually do like full-on training of the model and change how it's the data that it's trained on with that API option. So some really cool things there if you wanted to go into those more advanced ways of SMEs. So that was virtual SMEs. Everything we just talked about prompting is going to really be the same for the other use cases I'm going to talk about. So that's why I just called this kind of generic advanced AI use cases. Because now we're going to talk less about one specific use case and more about the art of what's possible, especially when it comes to product ownership. So here is a product management lifecycle. Through the whole project, of course, if we're agile, we're doing this in iterations or in sprints. You can do everything from envisioning all the way through to our managing of our project. And those little pink stars are just places where we, personally, have seen that we could use AI on our projects. So don't worry. And everybody will get all the slides, by the way, so you don't have to take too many pictures. But here are some of how we either envision or are currently using AI on our projects. So even today, we're having AI help us identify business objectives. So give it a project charter and have it tell us what the business objectives should be. Another thing that we found that's hugely helpful, less on product management, but especially on project management, is generating executive summaries. How much time do people spend summarizing either what happened in a sprint or what happened in a release to that C-suite? Well, it turns out with RAG, that we're going to talk about on the next slide, you can give it your requirements and it can tell you the summary. You don't have to summarize it. It's great. We talked about AI SMEs, so those are great. We're also starting to dabble into using it to actually generate visual models. Like, this has been a dream of mine for so long of like, I want to give you an elicitation session and you make the process flow. Why do I have to go make the process flow? AI is getting to the point where it can do that. It can also take an elicitation session and generate your user stories and acceptance criteria. I'm going to demo that here in a few minutes. Other things that we're not there yet, but I can see happening, which would be really awesome, is using AI on our sprints. Having AI say, yep, looking at your backlog, here's the next 20 items that make the most sense based on priority and dependencies to be in the next sprint. It's not going to be right 100%, but I don't have to cull through the backlog to figure it all out. I just look at what it gave me and say, yep, nope, good, bye. One that I'm really excited about if it comes true is as new requirements come in, new user stories come into my backlog, I want the AI to tell me what the impact is to everything I already built. Because I don't know about you, but that's what I spend a lot of my brain power on. Is you asked me to add widget X, is that going to break anything else I've already done? And if the AI can tell me that, that would be huge. And then lastly, another area that I'm really excited about is I want AI to write my test cases. I hate writing test cases. So if the AI can generate my test case list and maybe eventually even run the tests, that would be a huge boon. And I think we're getting there. I don't think we're that far off with some of the AI models. But you may ask, how do we get there? You're probably not just going to go to ChatGPT and say, hey, write my user stories. To do these kinds of use cases, you really have to use RAG. That's why I said that acronym would come in later, that retrieval augmented generation. This is where you give the AI your own data to use in addition to everything else it's been trained on. And if you're going to do that, want to give some thought. This is true pretty much of any data project, but especially true of AI, because if you give AI bad data, it'll be like, great, that's the answer, and it'll give it back out to you. So if you haven't seen GIGO, or garbage in, garbage out, it's true for all data projects, and especially true in AI. So you want to understand, what are your good data sources? What does it mean to have good data? Who is the steward of that data? How often is it changing? Because that's one of the biggest things about AI, especially, is that data has a shelf life, far more than in other projects, because what's good today may not be good tomorrow. And if your AI isn't kept up to date, it's going to slowly get worse and worse until it's giving you garbage answers. So you have to think about, how do we keep our data in the AI clean so that it can give us the best information? So you have to come up with those processes, which leads us into data flow. So how does that data get in there? Yep, it can be a one and done. I uploaded some data, great. But it's probably going to be more of a flow. Things will get updated over time. So we have to think through, how does that happen? Is it always a human? Is it always a person, uploading documents to the AI? Or is there a data feed? Is it done through APIs? And so things are automatically added to our AI. Or you can use, if you haven't seen this term, IPaaS, integration platform as a service. So these are things like low-code, no-code automation tools that can pull together various data sources and feed it to the AI. It's third in line, but I actually think it's one of the most important ones, people. Because people are the ones that are going to be using the AI, not your other systems primarily. So you have to make sure that all your people are trained, because they're your first line of defense. They can either be your strength, because they're good at using AI, or your weakness, because they don't know what's proprietary, and all of a sudden they're feeding all your trade secrets to AI. So you want to make sure that everybody who's using this has clear boundaries of what they should be putting in the AI, what they should not be putting in the AI. You want to make sure they're trained. They have that good prompt engineering training. And this is similar to any other project. You want to have that change management, that over-communication, to make sure that they know what they're supposed to be doing. If you want to do all this, you might say, well, how? Right? You're not going to be using ChatGPT, although it does kind of have RAG capabilities now, because you can attach documents, but you're not going to be feeding whole data sources to ChatGPT. So if you're going to go into more of a true RAG LLM and solution, we have two options here that we like. Cohere is your kind of enterprise option. So they have a huge team behind them, a great LLM that runs all their model, or that is their model. Great support. They are really on the cutting edge of everything. But it is, again, it's that enterprise level. If you're looking for something a little bit lighter weight, there's this tool called Anything LLM. And this is an open source tool, so you can download it. It's very easy. You can download it on your computer. It's pretty cheap. You can do it in a day, very fast. Because it is open source, it's not going to be as good, right, as a Cohere. But it's still really good. It's still really flexible. The power of both of these, in addition to applying your own documents, is very similar to how I talked about with the APIs. You can pull some of the knobs and levers. Now, as I said, I'm not the AI expert, so I can't tell you what all those knobs and levers are. But you can actually start to tweak the parameters that go into the AI that tell it, say, how creative of a response to give you, or how many, how big is that context window of information that we're feeding into it. So you can pull some of those levers that you don't have the option for in those more commercial tools. Now here, let's see. Do this. So this is something we've actually been working on internally. Let's see if I can. Oh, that's big. Let's see if I can get this to work. Did not expect this to be so big. Okay, that's too small. Okay, so in November last year, I gave a talk to the Agile at Scale SIG about technical acceptance criteria. It was called BDD when there are no users. And I walked through all the mistakes that people make when they write technical acceptance criteria. And then I walked through, well, how do you actually find acceptance criteria from a process flow like this? Right, so this is a quick automation. You get an email into an inbox, and then you go to SFDC, and you either create a case, a contact, or both. And then you send out notifications to Slack. So we have actually been, to take some of the cognitive load off of our teams, we have built a tool that actually does a lot of this prompting for you, So all you have to do is put in the information. So what I did, because I can't quite do pictures yet, we're almost there, I'd love to do pictures, I did a text version of this process flow, of what this is describing. And if you were at my talk, I talk about how you know how to do this, is that if you're saying that this is one story, every unique path through this process flow becomes an acceptance criteria. So I'm going to tell the AI that as well. So I'm going to come over here. There we go. So here, we've taken some of the prompting out of here, so I don't have to really write complex prompts. The only thing I'm telling it is that each path is one acceptance criteria, and then I'm giving it the process flow, what that process flow says. And then I can tell it to write requirements, and hopefully this works, because live demos are fun. Let's see. It's thinking. So what it's doing behind the scenes, we've actually trained this on 25 years of our experience, so all of our books, our articles, all of our presentations. The AI has access to that as it's going through here to know what does a good user story look like, right? So this is not quite just going to ChatGPT. And that pink bar across the top is what's telling us that hopefully it will be done soon. Okay. Nope. I may have to come back to it. Let it think. Okay, well, nope. I knew this would happen. Okay, we'll try again later. Let me get back to my screen, because I only have 5 minutes left. If we have time at the end, I'll try it again. But I told them not to do anything while I was doing this demo. If it had worked properly, it would have come up with the user story and had that as those AC. Now, right now, for some reason, it's not quite doing what I want, because I expected, if I give it that prompt, that I get 6 AC, because there are 6 unique paths through that process flow. For some reason, it's only giving me 4. So we're working on that. So that's the thing. It's not perfect yet. But even having those 4, well, 4 out of 6, was it 75% or 66%? That still gets me a lot closer than if I had to come up with those given when-thens by myself. Oh, and I gotta get this back on. Okay, last thing, I'm gonna go through this real fast because I got 5 minutes, is how do you use AI securely? When we talk to companies and individuals about security and about using AI tools securely, they usually fall into one of these 3 buckets. One is, yep, AI tools are okay, they're cool, as long as they don't train on my data. So we're going to talk about which ones do and don't here in a few minutes. The second one, they've seen the leaks. They have heard some of the press. They're really worried about their IP. So they say, great, you can use it, but only for kind of generic, non-proprietary information. And then you have the real paranoid ones that are like, nope, we don't trust you with our data at all. We're building everything in-house. And if you do that, that's really expensive. You only have 2 options. Either you build your own LLM from scratch, or you use an open source one that you're hosting on your own servers. But regardless of where you fall into this, your number one security tip here is training. Train your people. The people are the ones that are going to make or break this, because a tool, ChatGPT, it's not going to know if you gave it proprietary information. It's not going to go, oh, nope, sorry, you shouldn't have told me that. The people have to know that. And we like to think of this as kind of a new round of the phishing training, right? In the early days of phishing, people didn't just automatically know not to click suspicious links. We had to train them to say, nope, don't just randomly click things. It's going to be the same thing for AI too. The more complexity here is that it's not going to be as straightforward, because every company will have their own rules for what can and cannot. So make sure that you have those clear rules of how you are interacting with that AI. I'm not going to go through all of this, but we do have in the slides you can reference later of who is training on your data and when. Almost always, it depends on if you're using a free version or a paid version. Most of the time, paid versions are not training, or they give you an option to opt out. But if you're using a free version of various tools, they may be using your data to train. So again, I'm not going to walk through all of that, but it is in the slides that you can reference later. Couple of options here if you are looking to implement an LLM. These are kind of the big names in the industry, so these probably aren't that surprising to most of you. OpenAI is huge, of course. Everyone's heard of ChatGPT. Anthropic, they're the makers of Claude. Claude is actually a really good AI. It's one of the better ones. They came up with what's called contextual RAG. And so their model is slightly better than most of the other models right now. But if you're on Gemini or Google or Microsoft already, you're probably just going to use their tool. Why are you going to go pick another one? Until recently, they were not quite as good as OpenAI or Anthropic, but they're catching up quickly. And once they get all their data sources connected, connected to Google Drive and SharePoint, they're going to at least match the other two. So any of these are good options. If you are in that security bucket of, heck no, you can't have my data, these are your kind of options here. You either build it yourself or you start with an open source LLM. So if you really want to build your own model, these are the two ways with our pros and cons. Most companies, unless you are an AI company, you're probably not building your own LLM from scratch because it is so expensive. It's 1 million GPU hours to train one model. And every time you want to upgrade it, you have to retrain the model. So it can get very expensive very quickly. But there are some pros. Obviously, it can be perfectly tailored. You have full control over everything. It's fully customizable. So if you are going down that route as an AI company, you can do that. But there are actually a lot of good open source options. Some pros there is that it's open source. So everybody can look at it. Everybody can poke holes in it and say, here's what's wrong with it. You have a broad base of support. But because it is open source, it does tend to be like a little lower quality. It's not quite as cutting edge. Because there's no incentive. There's no incentive for people to give their most valuable information away to everybody. And one tool that we like to recommend, and I think Jay had it in his presentation as well, to help evaluate these is called Hugging Face. So it lets you look at all the different LLMs that are out there, apply different filters. It's got leaderboards against different benchmarks. So it's just a really cool tool to play with. And other considerations, maybe you don't need a large language model. Maybe you can do a small language model if it's very niche. Are you going to host this on-prem or in the cloud? And lastly, understand, back to our Van Halen rule, how are you going to filter out which LLMs you want to use? So I'm cutting into the Q&A time a little bit, but I'm almost done, I promise. Every time we do this, we like to talk a little bit about the future. And honestly, I did this about a month ago. This actually might now be more like the current, but we'll talk through it anyway. Where are we going? Everything is moving so fast. And as we're going into the future of AI, we're going to have basically access to unlimited data. And we're actually seeing this one come true a little bit. I don't know if you've heard of MCP. It's like a universal adapter, effectively, for AI platforms. So they can hook up to any of your data sources, which is really fascinating. Once you have all that data, you can do really lots of things. But one of the cool things we think about is you could have an AI avatar of yourself. Because it's not necessarily just orgs, it could be personal. I could have that AI that has access to all my emails, my OneNote, all of my notes and everything that I know, and then don't come ping me on Slack, ping my AI avatar. If he can't figure it out, then come to me. And that avatar can be there 24/7. And they can ask him anything at any time. I don't think we're that far off from that. Another thing you're probably gonna hear a lot is agentic AI. That's one of the big new buzzwords. But this is where it becomes less passive and becomes active. I can give the AI a goal, and it can actually take steps in other applications to accomplish that goal. It's not just giving me information out. It does make me kind of feel like we're going to have Rise of the Machine at that point, but it'll be exciting. And then lastly, we talked about that context window. So every LLM has that context window, that limitation of how much information it can process before it starts giving bad answers. People actually think that this year, or maybe next year, we might get to a point where the LLMs will have unlimited context, where it can take as much data as it has and not start hallucinating. And then really the possibilities are endless. So 3 takeaways here. Gen AI can be really helpful, especially in this product management, product owner space. We talked about all those cool use cases. It's not going to be right all the time. You have to have that BS filter on. You have to be looking to see where it's wrong. And keep in mind those security concerns. There are resources here. You can find this in the slides. But we'll have some Q&A. So we've got our feedback form here. If you want, so that tool that I showed, it's very kind of a closed alpha right now, but we are making it open if you wanted to test it out. Maybe not right now because the server seems to be down. But if you wanted to get access to that, the information is in that QR code. Any questions? We got about 5 minutes. know I just talked at you guys for 50 minutes. Oh, we do have a question. Perfect.
So my mind's spinning in a good way about all of this. And just wondering, so to build, if my company was to look at using one of the open sources or anything of that nature, is there, like we have a Jira repository right now. Could you feed a whole bunch of information from the Jira repository into that in order to start to kind of create that AI for our stories in order for me not to have to leverage stakeholders any longer?
Well, I mean, you might still have to talk to your stakeholders.
Let me say as much.
The short answer is yes. I mean, I can't give you all the technical pieces because there's different ways you could do it depending on the tool that you're using. So you could like take an extract of that backlog and upload it into the AI. Using something like an MCP, you could actually connect it to Jira directly. So depending on which AI you're using and which route. But absolutely, like that's one of my dreams is like, I just want to give you my backlog and then you tell me what I'm building next. Good.
If you were going to give someone advice on a quick win kind of thing to do with employing this sort of AI, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. So a quick win. The problem with this is it's so very personal. I will give you my quick win. I was actually telling my colleague Carson about this. It did not work the way I wanted it to, unfortunately. But what I wanted to do, when I write my user stories, I write the story, of course, fine. But before I write my acceptance criteria, I come up with my scenarios, right? And I write like the title, the shorthand of the scenarios. So I had my shorthand, and I was like, great, I'm gonna take these shorthand scenarios, I'm gonna give it to the AI, and it's gonna spit out my gherkin. And I'm gonna save 20 minutes of copy pasting given when-thens. And it didn't work, unfortunately, but if it had worked, it would have been amazing. So try to find something like that, something that you're already doing that you know would take time, that grunt work we like to call it. I have to copy paste all these different things, or I'm repeating the same task over and over again. Those are some really good quick wins that AI, at least hopefully, can help us with.
Great presentation. We trained some models, I assume they would be called RAGs in ChatGPT, and we're looking at possibly bringing them over to Gemini. Do you have any tips, tricks for porting that over from ChatGPT to Gemini, or would we just have to start over with building that RAG?
That is a great question, and I do not know the answer. But I can take the question away. We do have, so as I said, I'm not the AI expert, I'm a product owner, but we do have AI experts at ArgonDigital. So if you want, I can connect with you and I can ask them and see if they have any tips or tricks.
We don't have a question online, but we do have a comment. You were the best presentation for me today.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, as Max likes to say, we like to start on time and end on time, so I want to get you guys out for your break and for the panel. Thank you all for coming today.